Muted.
Okay. Thank you for joining today's presentation entitled Azure Hybrid Connections, Expose Enterprise Data and Services. Our presenter today is Gaurav Dhamija from Motifworks. My name is Robin Dvorak, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I want to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate in today's session. You've joined today's webinar listening through your computer speaker system by default. This means if you can hear music through your computer, you will also be able to hear the presentation. If you'd like to join in using the phone, just locate your audio panel and select Use Telephone. The dial-in information and access code will then be displayed. You also have the ability to ask questions using the Questions pane. Please, just type in your question and click Send, and at the end of the presentation, we'll manage a Q&A and take as many questions as we have time for today. Okay, let's get started. Very pleased to introduce Gaurav Dhamija, our Cloud Solutions Architect here at Motifworks. Gaurav is a seasoned architect with strong skills in user training, technical leadership, and support for customers in complex environments. His main focus is helping customers understand how Azure can help solve business and technical challenges. During today's agenda, we'll talk about why enabling connectivity matters, business drivers, solution characteristics, what your options include, Azure Hybrid Connections, and then follow that up with a demo. Welcome again, everyone. Gaurav, I'm turning the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Robin. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. My name is Gaurav, and I will take you through the rest of the presentation, and we will discuss how enterprises can get value out of their on-premise data sources and internal services using Azure Hybrid Connections as one of the options. Before we get started, I would like to quickly introduce Motifworks. Motifworks is an Azure partner, Microsoft Azure partner. We started in 2010, and we have been working in Azure for the past 6 years. And we have been involved in multiple engagements, helping customers with their Azure enablement. And here you see a very quick overview of our Azure practices. We have a specific focus on ISV customers, where we help them in their product design and modernization to leverage Azure services. And we have been involved in multiple engagements where we have evolved on-premise applications into SaaS-based multi-tenant applications. Our app modernization practice is where we help customers take advantage of message-oriented stateless architectures in Azure platform and move towards a SaaS-based multi-tenant application. And we have also our Azure consultancy practice, where we help our customers get understanding Azure, and we also provide them deep dive sessions in various Azure services. We also have a very strong focus on BI and Azure Analytics, specifically on HD Insight and machine learning. And I would also like to highlight our managed services in general and security as a service in particular. With managed services, we provide 24/7 operational support for applications hosted in Azure. And with security as a service, we provide facilities like intrusion detection, managed web application firewall, log management, and load balancing services in Azure. And please feel free to reach out to us if you need any assistance with any of these services. With that, we will get started with Azure Hybrid Connections. And let's set up a use case for why enterprises would like to connect their on-premise data sources and services in Azure. We have been talking to multiple enterprise customers and across various verticals like healthcare, insurance, and financial domain. Traditionally, they have an interest in keeping their data and internal services behind corporate firewall. And the reason they state usually is they're driven by regulatory compliance, whether it is HIPAA, PCI, SOX compliance, or they might have made considerable on-premise investment in their hardware or virtualization stack. At the same time, they also have interest in unlocking this potential, and there are several reasons out there for it. If you look at, B2B, B2C, and B2B scenarios. So all these enterprises have interest in collaborating with their business partners. In order to do that, they need to expose some of these services through which they can connect to their external partners. And if you look at the growth of IoT, if you look at the growth of mobile devices, There are third-party developers who are always ready to interact with services exposed by enterprises, and this can generate a new revenue stream for enterprises. So B2B, B2C, and business-to-employee scenarios where they can leverage these internal services through applications hosted on employees' mobile or tablet. This can improve efficiency of their employees. So B2B, B2C, and B2E is one of the scenarios where when we talk to customers, we find a lot of interest in these scenarios. Along with that, most of these enterprises have also made considerable investment in their SaaS platforms, which may include Office 365-based SaaS platforms like SharePoint Online, Dynamics Online, or Salesforce itself. All these SaaS investments which these enterprises have made, they would like to integrate these SaaS platforms with their on-premise data sources and internal services. And you usually find these enterprises, they have investment in their cloud strategy, and they want to leverage various services in cloud, whether it is Azure Websites, Azure App Service, or even other cloud platforms which they might have used in their organization as part of their organization strategy to connect to these on-premise data sources and services. So in a nutshell, innovation, monetization, and efficiency are all the driving factors which are making these enterprises think like how they can leverage keep the data within the security of their corporate firewall. At the same time, they take advantage of all these new opportunities coming out in front of them. And we will discuss Azure Hybrid Connections as part of this corporate strategy, where they can use Azure Hybrid Connections to connect to their data sources without opening any inbound connections through their corporate firewall. So usually when we talk about enterprises, they have these security requirements in their mind. Like whatever solution we propose to these enterprise customers, it should be reliable and secure. They cannot compromise at all on the security part. It should require minimal or no changes to corporate firewall. If this is something which we can provide to them, it's great. There should not be changes to existing data sources or APIs. So usually when we propose solution, we may ask, okay, to create a proxy to these data sources or change their APIs to support a new protocol. So usually enterprises would like to make no changes to their existing data sources and API, simple to implement, cost-effective. And one important emerging enterprise requirement is the solution should be technology agnostic or cross-platform. They would like to leverage multiple programming platforms, whether it is .NET, Java, PHP, Node.js, and these technology platforms keep on evolving. New technology platforms keep on emerging, so they don't want any kind of technology lock-in. At the same time, the solution should be scalable, and there should be a short learning curve along with it. So these are the usual enterprise requirements which we get around the solution that we propose for letting the external services connect to their on-premise data sources. So with that, let's discuss few of the connectivity options that enterprises usually have. Usually, one of the solutions that usually people come up with is setting up a virtual private network, whether it is through Azure or through their own data center, connecting to their partner data centers. That is one solution that usually people come up with. And it's very complex to set up. We all know that IT involvement, the amount of IT involvement required in setting up the virtual private network. With the coming up of these public cloud services like AWS, Azure, there are solutions available where public cloud can become your hub of on-premise connectivity. And this is what we will see in today's session as well, where there are services available in these public cloud providers which can help you in connecting your on-premise data sources securely to your partners or B2B or B2C scenarios. We have, specifically in Azure, there are two services, which is Service Bus Relay and Azure Hybrid Connections. So let's talk about a scenario where we start using Azure as your hub to enable on-premise connectivity. So we have used Azure here, and this will enable your partners, the mobile applications, your SaaS applications, and even help you build a multi-cloud strategy. Now, in Azure, there are few services which can help you to connect your on-premise data sources, and one of which is setting up a virtual private network with Azure. Now, in this case, if you look at a few characteristics here, it's one of the complex installation. It requires a bit complex installation. It requires you to set up a VPN device within your corporate, and using that, you need to connect to your Azure subscription. Within Azure subscription, you need to set up virtual networks and set up connectivity between the virtual network and on-premise VPN device using VPN gateway. And Azure is also promoting another private WAN connectivity solution, which is ExpressRoute. So these solutions enable you to keep your data on-premise, at the same time taking advantage of Azure services and enabling various scenarios highlighted here, but it requires a quite complex setup. It's totally an IaaS-based solution since you are provisioning virtual networks and having this VPN device and connecting each one of them. So if you look at time to value, which is a critical factor for various enterprises, it takes a time to realize the value since it involves a complex installation, and you have to go through this process of procuring VPN devices and connecting them to Azure. However, it gives you a low latency connection, and you can leverage that low latency connection in several scenarios. So that is the advantage of using a VPN. On the other side, we have Azure Service Bus Relay. This was one of the workhorse of on-premise connectivity, which helped various SaaS applications specifically to connect to your on-premise data sources. Now the advantage here is, unlike VPN, there is no VPN device that you have to set up in your on-premise network and connect it to virtual networks in cloud and then leverage these services to connect to your on-premise data sources. Unlike that, it relies on very fast outbound connections, and this is one advantage of Service Bus Relay, where you don't need to open any inbound connections to in your corporate firewall. It's a very path-based solution. However, it is limited to .NET framework, and that is where hybrid connections help us. Hybrid connections, you can think of it as an enhancement over Service Bus Relay technology. It again relies very similarly to Service Bus Relay in terms of connectivity options, that it uses very fast outbound connections. And the advantage with hybrid connection is that it's cross-platform. So you can use, instead of only being limited to .NET, as in the case of Service Bus Relay, here you can leverage Java, .NET, PHP, Node.js, and various technologies to connect to your on-premise data sources. And that is what we will see in the demo today on how we can leverage Azure Hybrid Connections. And also, it works at very low layer level, that is TCP and HTTP, which enables it to connect not only to your services, which are on-premise, but also to various databases like Oracle, SQL, and MySQL. Whereas in case of hybrid connections, you are limited to services only. So with that, we will move over to the demo, where we will see how we can use hybrid connections to connect to our on-premise data sources. So in the demo, I will show you an on-premise SQL server and an on-premise hosted service, and then we will see how we can use Azure Hybrid Connection to connect to it. Okay, so this is my workstation, and here you can see we have an internal server, which is 10.0.0.5. This is our internal server, and here we have a couple of databases which are behind corporate firewall. Now these are not accessible externally. The server 10.0.0.5 is completely locked down. At the same time, we have hosted a service on this server in order to show you how we can leverage Azure Hybrid Connection to expose internal services. I have set it up on port 8089. And if I look at the Swagger documentation of the service, it's a very basic service where we can search for products. Let's search for product chai. Yeah, and it's working. So we have this locally hosted HTTP service on port 8089, and we have these databases hosted on this database server on this internally logged server. Now we will see how we can leverage Azure Hybrid Connections to expose it to third-party applications. So traditionally, what we do is we will be using our developer workstation, and we can connect to these data sources from our developer workstation to build various applications. So for example, in case of our database server, I have connected to it and created this very simple application. Let me run and show you what this application does. So this is an API that I have created around the customer database. Okay, let's look at the Swagger documentation of this. This is a very simple web API that I have created to expose my customer database. And if you see, I can search for customers. It does a full text search on various customer properties: first name, last name, email, city, and state. So in order to expose my database externally, what I have done here is I have created a web API which I will host in Azure, and all my third-party applications can connect to this web API and then use, and that's how I'm able to leverage an internal connection to my database. So if you see, the connection string here is directly referencing my internal database server. Now, if I publish this particular web API, let me publish it. So here I'm leveraging Visual Studio App Service tools, and I'm publishing it as a Microsoft Azure App Service. I've already set up the publish profile. If you see different settings here, I can publish it over here. It will just take a few seconds to publish. In the meantime, I will open up the Azure portal to show you how to set up Azure Hybrid Connection. So I'm navigating to App Services section of Azure portal. This is the new Azure portal. If you look here, we have published our web API, which is Customer Search API. And this is the API which is now connecting to our on-premise database server. So in this is a new portal. And in this, if you see, in the settings of App Service, we can go at the bottom, and where we see networking, it shows various on-premise connectivity options. We discussed VNet as one of the connectivity options, which is more complex, and hybrid connections is one of them. So this particular service needs to connect to our on-premise database server. I've already set up the connectivity just for the sake of the demo, but I will show you how to set up a new hybrid connection endpoint also. So you go over here and click Add Hybrid Connection and say New Hybrid Connection. Here you need to add a unique name to the hybrid connection. So it could be on-premise SQL Server. And then here you need to put in the IP address. And you see here I'm putting in the internal IP address of the database server and the port which I need to connect to. So Azure Hybrid Connection is part of Azure Stock Services. So you have to provision an instance of the stock service. If you haven't, then it gives you an option to create a new stock service right here itself. There is a free tier available which you can use to test hybrid connections. So It's a very simple setup. To create a new hybrid connection, you come over here in the app service properties. You go over to the networking. Properties. You check hybrid connections, and then basically you create a new hybrid connection. And in case you want to create a new desktop service, you can create a new desktop service in free tier, and that's all you need to do in order to create a new hybrid connection in Azure portal. Now, all of this can be done using PowerShell as well. So, from DevOps perspective, you can use PowerShell to create this entire setup. So, once you have created this connectivity, what you need to do, what I will do is I will just refresh it. So, sometimes it happens that it shows the connection is not available. It's just a matter of refreshing it in the portal. And here it is back. So once you have created your hybrid connection, that is the Azure endpoint, which is now available to you. You need to set up the listener part also. So your application is set up and all ready to connect to your on-premise data source with the help of this endpoint. And the second part of the setup is the listener setup. So the listener is the one which will sit on-premise, and the listener and Azure Hybrid Connection will talk to each other in order to transmit data. So what we need to do here is a listener is a very low footprint 2.5 megabytes of installer which you need to download and use this as the connection string. This is the connection string which uniquely identifies hybrid connection in cloud. So when you install the connection manager, which is called hybrid connection manager, you need to use this particular connection string in order to establish connectivity between them. So usually, you will be having multiple services installed on different servers and different database servers which you want to connect to external applications. So what we use, the best practice that is recommended is to have a specific server which we call Hybrid Connection Manager server, which will be one consolidated connection point for all your internal services and database server. So what we do is basically we download the installer and we install it here. And this is where we add the connection string. Now, I have already done this before. So if you are creating a new hybrid connection manager setup, you basically need to copy the connection string, which I showed you in the Azure portal, and you need to add it here. So once this installation completes, you will basically observe that in your Windows service, you can see a Azure Hybrid Connection Manager service. So basically, this is where the magic lies for Azure Hybrid Connection on how it is able to connect to your on-premise data sources without opening inbound ports in your corporate firewall. Basically, this service will establish a permanent connection with Azure Hybrid Connection in cloud, and that will be used to create data channels through outbound connections. So this is the service. This is a key service which helps in creating these fast outbound connections through which data is transmitted from on-premise data sources or internal services to external applications. And that's how we are able to manage this connectivity without opening any inbound firewall ports. So what we saw here, to summarize, is we saw two parts of on-premise connectivity setup. First part we saw is basically we went inside Azure portal, and for the specific Azure app service, we created the hybrid connection. So that was the first part. And the second part was setting up an on-premise listener. So these two endpoints, one in cloud and one on-premise, they will talk to each other and create data channels whenever somebody wants to, any application wants to talk to on-premise data source. So in this case, it's our web API, which wants to talk to on-premise data source. So let's go to that web API. So you see in my address bar, this is an Azure hosted web API. I can see the Swagger documentation for it again. And we can try it out. And you see it's able to fetch data from my on-premise database server. So again, to point out, I had published this application in cloud. And if you see my code, I had mentioned my internal database server IP address directly as a connection string, directly in the connection string. So you see an application hosted in cloud is able to connect to my on-premise data sources using Azure Hybrid Connections. So this is how we expose a database server. And similarly, what I've also done is in this demo, as part of this demo, is we have got a service hosted internally. So let me show you that service. So this is our service which is hosted on port 8089. So not only our database server, but also our internal services can be exposed using Azure Hybrid Connection. And what I have done is I have created a sample application to leverage this service. So let me show you that sample application. It's a very simple ASP.NET MVC application. If you see in the index file of it, or the home page of it, I am directly invoking this service from my internal server. So if I run it, now this is running locally on my developer workstation, and now I will publish it to the cloud, and from cloud it will be able to connect to my internal service. It's taking a bit of time. Let's give it a few seconds. Yeah. So let's try to search for a product or any kind of beverage. So this application is leveraging an internal service, and if you see the source of this application, we can see clearly that it's trying to hit an internal service hosted on port 8089. What I will do now is I will publish this in cloud and show you that an application hosted externally can leverage this. So similar to how I published my Azure app service, I'm leveraging Visual Studio Microsoft Azure App Service tools to publish it. And I've created this profile previously itself. And in this case, I'm deploying it as a web app. Let me publish it. Take a few seconds to publish. And let's try to search for beverages again. And you can search it. Now, if again I do the view page source, you see here that it is connecting to my internal service. And how that magic happened is again through Azure Hybrid Connections. Let's go in the portal, Azure App Service, and let's have a look at the networking properties of product lookup web app. So again, like we discussed previously, there are two parts of on-premise connectivity. First, we need to create hybrid connection in Azure, and second, we need to do a listener setup. So let's go to networking. And I've already set up Azure Hybrid Connections again for the sake of this demo. If you go over here, it's just taking a few seconds to load up. Okay, it says not found, but that would probably be I just need to refresh this again. Again, like I mentioned before, this setup can be done using PowerShell for DevOps needs. We can utilize PowerShell to create this using scripts. Okay, no problem. It says not found. Probably this is some issue with the portal. So like I said previously, to leverage hybrid on-premise connectivity, we will have to create hybrid connection. Again, it's same steps that we followed with API service. The web app service follows the same steps exactly. We create a new hybrid connection, and then we mention the server name. We mention a unique name for the on-prem service. We use the internal address, and then we use, sorry, I missed it out. And then we mention the port number that we want to connect to. And again, it's part of desktop service, so if you don't have an instance of it, we need to have it. Once we have created the cloud endpoint, then we need to set up the on-premise listener. And it's exactly the same step. We click on the listener setup, and basically it will provide us a link. Okay, so it's back. So when we click on the listener setup, we will get an installer, similarly we discussed before, which we can download, install it on a server. And that's where I wanted to show you the advantage of using a common server. So I have configured the same server to act as a proxy for both my internal service and database server. So that way you can maintain organization-wide one hybrid connection management server, which will let you connect to different internal services and database services. So this is how we can leverage, this is a quick demo on how you can leverage Azure Hybrid Connection in order to connect your services and applications externally from an external partner point of view, B2B point of view, B2C point of view, or you can connect those applications to your internal on-premise data sources and services through Azure Hybrid Connection. So what we saw is basically we exposed these services, internal services and database, in an application or an app service hosted in cloud. Now all your partners can leverage these services. So for example, we talked about the first service, the customer database. We exposed customer database as part of customer search API. Now your partners, you can use this from your mobile apps. You can use this, you can give this to your external partners. Now, before you give it to your partners, there will be more, production ready checklist with you where you want to enable security, you want to enable monitoring and other security aspects of this service. I'm showing you from the aspect of connectivity that this service can connect to your on-premise data sources and services, and you can leverage them. So that's how you leverage Azure Hybrid Connection, and this was a quick demo of it. So now we will go ahead and discuss a few more advanced scenarios in Azure Hybrid Connections, as well as key features of it. So like we discussed, we can connect to SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle, Web APIs, or most of other data sources that use TCP or HTTP because it works at a low layer level. It works at TCP level using Hybrid Connection Manager. We are able to ensure any data source which has TCP connectivity, we can expose it through Azure Hybrid Connection. It's cross-platform and supports multiple frameworks. I showed you an example using .NET, but you can use it to leverage Java, PHP, Node.js. It's totally compatible with them. And you also saw that I did not punch holes through my Windows firewall or even my perimeter firewall. On top of it, it supports Active Directory group policy, so you can manage control over what internal resources and database servers you want to expose through it. So that it provides you a template in your group policy which you can leverage to have control. Specifically from security perspective, let's have a discussion. It's secure, simple, and like I said, it relies on certain outbound connections. Usually enterprises may not have outbound egress policy in place for their firewall, so it's able to do a seamless connection. However, if the outbound connections are also closed, then we need to ask IT team to at least have outbound policy enabled on port 5671 and 9530, 9532, and 443 as well, because that sets up the secure connection between on-premise Hybrid Connection Manager and cloud-based Hybrid Connection endpoint. These ports have specific roles, like I mentioned here. So 5671 is the one which sets up a permanent connection between your hybrid connection manager and your hybrid connection endpoint in cloud, and the other two ports are used for transmitting data. So with these ports, for outbound connection only, we can enable the secure connectivity. Let's look at a couple of advanced scenarios where, in this case, if we see our hybrid connection manager server can become single point of failure, and which we would not like to have. This can be, we can leverage multiple hybrid connection managers on-premise. We can club them together to create a load balanced tier of hybrid connection managers, and all the connectivity can pass through it. This can give you advantage in the sense that it gives you a high availability mode of hybrid connection manager. At the same time, it supports many complex cardinality scenarios. So for example, you can have multiple hybrid connections in cloud leveraging same hybrid connection manager, which we saw here in this demo as well. And at the same time, you can expose multiple web APIs and multiple data sources through same hybrid connection manager load balance tier. So you see here, it's quite reusable, and with common load balance hybrid connection manager on-premise, you can expose all these APIs and databases. And one of the most important pieces is the pricing. So with, as I said before, Azure Hybrid Connection comes up with the stock services, and the stock services comes in 5 SKUs with Microsoft, from Microsoft. So we have a free tier where you can create 5 hybrid connections, and the data transfer limit is 5 GB. So you can use free tier to test out connectivity and use it for any kind of sample applications. There are more advanced, advanced scenarios where you more bandwidth and more number of hybrid connections. You can appropriately choose between basic, standard, and premium tier. Yep, that all was about hybrid connections. And we as Motifworks, please let us know if we can help you in any way to get started. We have specific workshops and consulting arrangements where we specifically help customers to get into cloud, and also do a deep dive discussion with them on their existing application. We go through them, their source code, and work with the development team to understand their application architecture, and then give them best practices and guidelines on how they can leverage Azure, how they can redesign it to leverage various Azure services. So we have Azure 101 and Cloud Assessment 1-week workshop where we go over Azure services. We talk about IaaS, PaaS, compute storage, networking, talk about best practices, and do an assessment of their existing workload. So this is about various workshops which you can leverage, and you can get talk to us about these different workshops. We can customize them according to your team's need as well. So with that, we end up today's session, and I will hand it over to Robin now.
Thank you, Gaurav. At this time, we would like to open things up to Q&A and to some questions we've received during the course of the presentation. Gaurav, the first question we have in is, how does the hybrid connection ensure data security?
Yes, that's a very good question. So from security perspective, the connection between on-premise hybrid connection manager and cloud-based hybrid connection is secured using TLS security. So it's a transport layer security that is in place. So Microsoft ensures that all data that is transmitted between hybrid connections and hybrid connection manager is completely secure.
Super. Thank you so much. The next question that we have coming in is, when should we use hybrid connections over Azure Service Relay?
Yes. So Azure Service Relay has been being used for connecting to on-premise data sources before. The limitations there are around platform, cross-platform availability there. It's limited in that sense that it only allows you to use .NET platform. With hybrid connections, you have more platform availability choices available, like you can use PHP, Java, and other technologies. So if you are looking for connecting using Java, PHP, or Node.js, I would say you go with hybrid connections. As well as hybrid connections work at low level at TCP level, which allows you to connect to more data sources. So I see that hybrid connections can be a good choice. There, one scenario where service bus relay can be used is right now hybrid connections leverages Azure App Service, and it will be exposed to multiple other Azure services. So that's where it is limiting right now, where you might still use service bus relay.
Thank you, Gaurav. Another question that came in while you were answering that is from one of our participants is, if I'm using service bus relay, how easy is it to convert this to hybrid connections? You may have answered this one already. I just wanted to put it out there, though.
Yes. So if you are already using service bus relay, so you would probably have created a WCF service to take advantage of service bus relay. Now, you will have to basically replace that on-premise WCF service with Hybrid Connection Manager server. So that will basically replace your WCF service, on-premise WCF service, which is utilized. And on the client side, you will have to basically start using this hybrid connection which you create in cloud. So it's a pretty, there is a migration strategy here, and it's basically to create hybrid connection manager and hybrid connection in cloud. So these are two different technologies, so you will have to provision these new services and then leverage them.
Thanks, Gaurav. Another question that's come in from one of our participants: do I need to write new API in Azure, or could I use something I already have?
So, so basically, if you need to leverage any of your on-premise internal services without putting it in Azure, what you will have to do is basically you have to write some proxy in Azure. So you will need to write some sort of API in Azure leveraging Azure App Service, and that will be basically used to connect to third-party applications, your business partners, or your mobile applications. So at this point, if you have an internal service, you need to have a corresponding proxy also written in Azure App Service, which will be connecting to it. And then that proxy service will be the one used by your external partners and any third-party application.
Super. Thank you, Gaurav. That looks like that wraps up the questions that have come in. So at this time, I'd like to thank you again, Gaurav Dhamija, and I hope that you all, the participants, have enjoyed this webinar. Please stay on the line at the end to fill out a brief survey to help us continue to provide quality content as we go forward. And we hope that you'll join us at the next webinar in our Journey to the Cloud series. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great day.